Welcome everyone to Enterprise.expert. Today is Wednesday, October 18th, and this is the October 2017 episode. Today's episode is Billable Time and Expenses in QuickBooks Enterprise. We'll spend about 5 minutes talking about the webinar series, briefly about myself, the presenter, and then we'll spend about 15 minutes on billable time from timesheets, about 15 minutes billable expenses, 15 minutes on items, about 5 minutes on billable miles, and we'll leave the last 5 minutes for Q&A. Now, this may be a little bit less than an hour, and that would be okay because the topic may be covered a little bit less than an hour, but we'll try to make it an hour as much as we can. What is Enterprise.expert? It's a community of enterprise level consultants, experts in the field that mostly focus on the technology aspect. We have this webinar series that we do every month. We're still working on our website, which is enterprise.expert, no www.com, and our Facebook group, which is pretty active. People are logging in, asking questions about QuickBooks Enterprise, how to implement it, what type of add-ons work for their particular scenarios and that sort of thing. So I recommend that you do join the Facebook group as well. So by enterprise, we're talking about mid-level type of companies that are a little bit bigger than sort of the smaller startups. That way they can they will really enjoy from a bigger software package like QuickBooks Enterprise, and in many cases technology that attaches to it, barcode scanners, add-ons, and stuff like that. And technology would be anything in that space, right? The database, software. All right, so let's go ahead and real quick talk about the webinar series. We're a monthly webinar series that's every third Wednesday of each month. November would be a little bit of an anomaly. That would actually be on actually that may land on the third Wednesday. We'll see. I'll give you the date on that. And this is not a CPE webinar, and this is not sponsored or collaborated with any third-party software. However, if they do, we usually announce it, and that may be coming because we're quickly running out of QuickBooks Enterprise topics. So we may start working with third-party add-ons and stuff like that, and we'll definitely leverage them to keep this webinar alive for beyond QuickBooks Enterprise topics. I'm Hector Garcia. I'm a CPA based out of Miami, South Florida. I have a couple of colleagues in different states. I have one in Los Angeles that I send a lot of enterprise work to, and I work all over the country, actually all over the world. And my email is hector@garciacpa.com if you have any questions. So let's start with billable time from timesheets. The first concept is that time that's on a timesheet is non-posting, so it doesn't affect your books when it's on the timesheet. It needs to be converted into a payroll check or into a bill for contractors in order for it to actually affect your cost, for it to be posting. However, when you mark something billable, that becomes eligible to be able to create it into an invoice. You will notice that on every timesheet, you will have two pieces of data that you have to record other than the customer that you're going to bill it to. Is you have to record the service item and the payroll item. So the service item is the item that it's going to be transferred onto the invoice once you make it billable and transfer to an invoice. And the payroll item is the item that affects the actual cost part when the timesheet is transferred into a paycheck. So that's an area where there's certainly a lot of confusion. So hopefully that will clear it up. So let's start by creating a timesheet. So I'm going to go into the employees menu. I'm going to click on enter time, and then I'm going to click on use weekly timesheet. So I'm going to select an employee at random here. So I'm going to pick Dan Miller, and there's already some data in here, and this is from the sample file. So I'm actually going to select another one. Okay, there you go, perfect. Elizabeth, she doesn't have any time, so let me work on her. So I'm going to pick the customer job. So let's say for this customer called local store, we're going to charge them for framing, and then on the notes we'll put half the job or something like that, and you'll see how the notes and all that stuff plays into it. So I'm going to put that it worked 8 hours on that job on Monday, 6 hours on Tuesday, and 4 hours on Wednesday. And let's say that on the other job that Elizabeth worked in that week was for West Coast distributor, and she was doing, let's say, not framing, was doing labor, and then we call it standard labor, whatever we want to call it. And then we're going to put in, let's say, 1 hour on Tuesday, 5 hours on Wednesday, let's say 5 hours on Thursday. And then for the same customer, West Coast distributor, she was doing, let's say, a different type of work. Let's say it's this one, concrete slab. And then I won't put any notes on this one. And then I'll put 3 hours here and then 4 hours here. So that kind of gives you an idea. This is what the whole week's timesheet looks like for this one employee. And then we went ahead and we added all the customer jobs that they were working on. And generally speaking, I create a customer called admin for the ones that are not being job costed. That way I can organize them into a bucket. And then under service item, I'll also put admin, and I'll create a service item that hits an income account, but at the end of the day, it's not really going to do anything. And then we can put here worked at the office. Okay, this is the stuff that's not billable or not job costable. And then let's say that was 4 hours on Friday. So that gives me the full 40-hour week. For some customers, they worked on site, and these are all by default marked billable. Now, there may be cases in which, for example, on this concrete slab, let's say this part of the job is not billable because we already invoiced the customer for it, or maybe we charged the customer a flat fee of some sort, and we're not necessarily having to invoice them from it. So that's a really important piece, that not everything, quote unquote, has to be billable. So I'm going to go ahead and unmark that billable. So I'm going to get rid of the little check mark, and then that particular job, it is job costed. That means that it will hit the customer job once we create this into a paycheck, but it's not necessarily going to show up in an invoice. So that's the dynamic of having billable and not billable, whether we pick the customer job or not. Okay, so we'll finish with that. Let me go ahead and hit save and close. I want to show you one more thing, because this part is really important. You don't only have to work from timesheets, you can also do single time entries. So let me show you something real quick. I'm going to do a single time entry, and then I'm going to pick the same Elizabeth, and then I'm going to pick another customer job here, regional store. I'll pick, let's say, blueprints, and then I can either do the start stop thing, or I can just put the hours. So let's say that was 3 hours, and then on the notes said went overnight to deliver blueprints, whatever. And then I'm going to mark that billable. So I'm going to hit save and close. So I used a single time entry, but I'm going to show you the dynamic of this. If I actually go back into my timesheet and I pick Elizabeth, you're going to notice that that time entry was added in there. So what QuickBooks will do is that if you enter from a timesheet or from a single entry, it's all jumbled together into the same thing. So a single time entry and a timesheet is actually the exact same thing. So let me hit save and close, and let's run a couple of reports related to that. So let me go into reports. I'm going to click on jobs, time, and mileage, and then I'm going to click time by job summary. So when I click on time by job summary, and let's say I'm going to pick this week. That way I'm just going to focus on this week in particular. So I'm going to click this week. I get all of my customer jobs that have time associated with it. And then I see on the sub items, on the subcategory, the actual items that we're using. Now, what's really cool about this report is I can do time by job by item. I can do time by job by name, for example, and I hit OK. So that breaks it down by job and then by my employee. Or I can do time by job by item by name, or by name by item. So I can really break this down in a real deep way. Let me get out of that and pull another time report. I'm going to go to reports, jobs, time, and mileage, and pull up time by name. So it's going to be an entirely different dynamic. This is going to group it by employee. So I'll do time by name. And then from here, I get all my employees, and then which jobs they were working in. So that gives you an idea kind of where all of those land. So I can also do this week. me do here this week. And you get all that information, including, like, for example, here I got the 4 hours of admin, so I can actually know exactly where all my employees are working in a very a very simple, summarized way, such as this report. And that's it. All the time reports are going to be here under jobs, time, and mileage, and they're going to be these four. So that's the only four time reports you can create. There's no other way to create any other reports related to time. So you're going to be abided by those four options. Okay, so those are the reports related to time. Now let's create some of these invoices. Let me close that, and let me go into customers, create invoice, and kind of show you the dynamic of billable time. So I'm going to create invoice and then select my customer. I'll pick this one called local store. And then this particular pop-up has to do with an open sales order. So I'm going to hit cancel on that. And then I get this pop-up, which is choose your billable time and costs. So I got the time tab, expenses tab, mileage, and items. Right now, we're only doing time for the time being. So we're focusing on time. And then these are my 3 time entries, 8 hours, 6 hours, and 4 hours that were marked as billable. And I can actually bring them all in, select all 3, and then I can hit OK. And they come in and they, let me see if I selected them correctly. Okay, let me mark them again. 1, 2, 3. Select all 3, hit OK, and then they come in all as one lump sum for the hours. Okay, that's because it came from a timesheet, right? So when it comes from a timesheet, it comes in as a lump sum. Now I'm going to go back to time and cost here for a second. Let me just hit clear here and do this again. Local store, hit cancel. I'm going to bring in 1 just to show you. Hit OK. I'm going to save the invoice. Let me remove the email later button there. I'll save the invoice. Then I'll click on add time and cost again. Bring the second one. Hit OK. Brings it in as a separate line item. Okay, otherwise I'm going to hit clear here for a second. I'm going to go to add time and cost. I'm going to bring the last 2, and then I'm going to hit OK, and that brings them in lump sum. So if it's using the same item and you're bringing them in one shot, it adds it together. But if you save it and go back and add them, it brings them in different lines. Now, why is that relevant? So let me, I'm going to delete this invoice real quick here. Okay, it's extremely relevant, and I'll show you why. So I'm going to go back into my timesheet for a second. And if you remember, I took one of those times and I marked it billed. So that's why that check mark changed from a little checkbox into whatever that is. That non-checkbox means it's already been billed. And now in this particular case, I created the invoice and I deleted it. So I need to go back into it and check it again because I want it to show up again in my list. I'm going to hit save and close. Okay, so we're going to be dealing with the exact same set of information. So I'm going to select my customer again, local store, hit cancel for the sales order estimate, pick these 3, and then something really interesting I can do. There's an options button on the top right that allows me to choose if I want to combine all the time activities into an item. This is what it was doing by default. If I click on enter separate line items, it will separate them. So now I don't have to go back, enter one at a time. It will do it for me. Now the really important piece is, do I bring in the default item description? So I'm going to hit OK to show you what that looks like. And the default item description in this case was just framing labor. Or hit clear. And then I'm going to click start the process again and select those 3 guys here. Click on options and say I want to bring the activity notes and hit OK. And this is an entirely different dynamic because the activity notes are now going to bring in the actual data that was on the timesheet. So if you're adding notes to the timesheet and you want to bring that over to the invoice, that particular setting is extremely valuable, really, really valuable. Now, one of the interesting concepts with billable time is this concept of service date. So I'm going to click on formatting, click on customize data layout, and then I'm going to enable under columns, I'm going to enable the service date, and then I'm going to hit OK. That way we notice that we have a column there for service date. Now I'm going to hit the drop down and click on local store, and you're going to be a little bit you may be a little bit disappointed by this concept. So let me do or you may like it. So we hit OK. What ends up happening is if I enable service date and the data comes from a timesheet, it transfers over with that particular date in it. So you can actually get the individual date, but the only way to do it is to separate them in different lines. Because if I don't separate them in different lines, so let me do this again to show you that way you see all the examples, iterations of this, because I experimented basically with every single option here. If I were to combine them in this case, and this is where I say maybe a little bit disappointed, and I hit OK. And then what happened to my service date? Okay, there's no way for it to break down the service date or give me a date range. It would basically pick the one that's the latest one or the most recent one to today. So that's where some people say, oh, I wish that gave me a date range. Well, that won't do that. So if you want to see the individual dates, you have to bring them in separate. If you combine them, then it's just going to show up the latest date or the one most closest to the future. Okay, so that's billable time, and that's actually an extremely simple concept. Once you get it working this way, it actually works quite nicely. One of the areas where people ask quite a bit is, what about the rate? Like, how do I set the rate? So in this particular case, the rate is set up to $55 an hour. Let me hit clear here for a second, and let me go into the item list and look at my framing labor, and this is what it's set up for. It's set up for 55. Now I can't set my billing rate on my timesheet, unfortunately, so this is going to bring the default item rate, for lack of a better term, that's from the item table. There are ways to change the dynamic of how that rate changes. Like, for example, you can use different items with different rates, or you can do what's called the billing level. So I'm going to click on the list menu and click on billing rate level. And then I'm going to create 3 billing levels. I'm going to show you for a second. I'm going to click on new, and then I'm going to create this one. I'm going to call it framing level 1. Okay. And then I'm going to make this one $26 an hour. And then I'll create another one called, I'll duplicate this one, and I'll call this one framing level 3, for example. I call this one level 3. And I'm going to make this one $75 an hour. So I'm using entirely different numbers. So the default rate in this case is 55, but I created 2 billing labels, one that takes the dollar amount to 25 and one that sends it to 75. So what we could do, and this is more of a concept of knowing right off the bat, what each employee is supposed to be billed at, is what we could do is when we bring in, if we don't set the employee up, and then we bring in the billable time. So I'm going to bring that in for a second. Click select all, make sure that we have, let's say, all. I like to keep them separate, and click OK, and then hit OK. That all comes in, and it comes in at $55, right? Now, there are pricing levels here, which this has to do with something completely different that has nothing to do with the billing rate. So you could use price level if you want to, but I particularly like billing rate. So let me show you. I'm going to hit clear again, and then I'm going to go into my employee section, and then I'm going to select Elizabeth Mason, double click on her, and then I'm going to go down to I believe is additional info, and I'm going to set her at framing level 3, and then I'm going to hit OK. So basically what I've done essentially is tell QuickBooks that any billable time that comes from a service item, from a timesheet, you're going to ignore the price and you're going to bring in the billing rate level. So I'm going to click on local store, hit cancel, select my rates here, and then hit OK. And notice that now this is coming in at $75. Actually, really, really neat. And this will be then tied to the service person, to the employee. If you wanted to tie it to the customer, then at that point, you don't use billing levels, you use price levels, which is a whole different thing. Recommend to go into my YouTube channel and watch videos on price levels. That's actually very different than this. Now, let me take a quick break here so I can drink water. Let me ask a quick polling question, just kind of get an idea for where you are, and then I'll look into the questions to see if there's any open questions. So Margot is saying, if there are different service rates on the invoice, will this still come different? So I think I answered your question with that example, Margot. So I hope I did. If I didn't, just write me back. I think I don't have any other questions. Please go ahead and input your questions in here. Just in case you have any questions or anything you want me to cover. If you want me to cover something that I'm not covering, please include that, because I don't know what you don't know. Okay, so I'm going to close the polling question. I just kind of wanted to get a gauge. They're not needed because this is not a certificate-based webinar, but right here, about 10% of the people use it very often, and they may not learn anything new. So I hope I can sway you at the end. We'll see. And the bulk majority of people have played with it, kind of used it, and just kind of really hoping that they learn something new today. All right, that's cool. So that is a timesheet from an employee. I will show you one more thing because I think it's worth noting. So I'm going to click no here because I actually kind of like this feature. I'm going to go into vendors. I'm going to click on to, actually, I'm going to go into employees, enter time, and use the weekly timesheet. But this time around, I'm not going to use an employee. I'm going to use a vendor, like let's say a contractor of some sort. And I'm going to go through the same motions here. So I'm going to pick Northeast Wholesalers. I'm going to pick, let's say, floor plans. And let's say I'm going to do 7 hours for this one. And then we'll do regional store. And we'll pick floor plans. And that was, say, 6 hours on this one. And I'm going to put 8 hours on this same job here. So I'm marking them billable. And I'm doing a timesheet for a vendor, not an employee. So I'm going to go ahead, save and close. Again, this is not going to post into my accounting. This doesn't turn into cost. I actually would have to create a bill for this to work in terms of accounting and cost. So I have to go to enter bills, and I have to select my vendor, and I have to bring in the data from the timesheet. It's asking me, would you like to bring it? I hit yes and select the date range. So in this case, it would be everything for the month of August, for example, and I hit OK, and that brings in the billable time from it, and then I would have to pick the cost based on the vendor. So this is how we do the actual process of job costing it. So the actual process of including it in our accounting, in our accounts payable, but we don't have to do that in order to mark it billable. We can do that simply at the timesheet level. Now, the one really important thing I like to kind of implore you in this case, let's say they charge $50 an hour here, so I'm going to bring in $50 here. Let's say this is what they charge. Make sure you don't mark it billable again, because it'll double up. It'll be billable on the bill and billable on the timesheet. This is a glitch of QuickBooks, not recognizing that's already been marked on the timesheet, and it could potentially mark it again on the bill. So this is one area that I'm not too happy that it still allows you to mark it billable, even though it already has been done on the timesheet. But if you're watching this webinar or the recording, you've been warned and you know exactly what's going on. So let me go back and create the invoice and just kind of see the behavior with that. Pick Northeast Wholesalers. There's my contractor. I hit OK, and I'll hit OK. So there's my hours come in. Now my price for each is $0 because I haven't set a price for this item, and then everything would fall into place the exact same way, right? We would have to create the billable rate for the contractor to bring in the right dollar amount. As a matter of fact, let me do that, because that's an area where a lot of folks get confused at. So I'm going to go to VU contracting, and I'm going to look for my billable rate. Where are you? Billing rate. And I'm going to put this at, let's say, framing level 3, or I'll create a new one. And then I forgot what this one was called. Yeah, I'll just pick the same one. Let me pick this one at 3, and I'll hit OK. Remember, this is going to set it at $75 an hour. So let me go back and create that invoice again. Pick my customer. select the two, and that's going to come in at $75 an hour. So that should give you enough to kind of see, how interesting this whole concept of taking billable time and expenses. But one thing I want to make sure that that you also know, kind of an alternative to showing the details, is if you bring in the hours, there's a little checkbox in the bottom that says print selected time and cost as one invoice item. Now, that's not the same thing as combine them, because combine them means summon together and create an item for it. And although it feels like that option of combining and this print is the same thing, it's not. The printing, what it does is that the printing itself does a group and it hides it. So I'll show you what that looks like. So I'm going to click on that and hit OK. So that will still separate them into two different items, but it creates this weird thing here called reimbursable group. So what happens is the details of these items become something that only the end user of QuickBooks can see, but when you create the invoice, it can't. So the customer can't. So when I click on preview, and that's a bad template to use. The template is messed up. I'll pick another one, and then I click on preview. Whoops, I don't know what's wrong with my templates. Got all messed up. Let me try this one, preview. Okay, that one's clean. So notice that there's no line item level. There's just a group, and basically all the items are hidden in it. And the purpose of that is because maybe we don't want the customer to see every item, every cost, and we just want to total it up. Or maybe I want to have internal notes in here on the description, and again, I don't want the customer to see it. So either way, it's up to you, right? Which one do you wanna do? So I'll hit save and close, and that will wrap it up for billable time. So let's switch over to billable. Let's switch over to billable expenses. Now this is an entirely different dynamic, because this is not data coming from a timesheet. And this is not data coming from items. This would be information where the transactions were hitting an actual GL account, that we're hitting a chart of accounts account. And then we can also make that billable. But what's interesting about using the accounts instead of the items or the time is that you can actually have built-in markups for these. And the dynamic in terms of what it ends up looking like for the customer, it will be very similar than that hidden invoice that had all the hidden items. But the dynamic internally in terms of accounting changes, because you will actually have a markup account. So let me show you what that looks like. Again, until you see the actual example, it doesn't make much sense. So let's say, for example, I'm going to write a check to one of my contractors here, VU Contracting, and then I'm going to, instead of using the items or the timesheet as before, I'm going to use the expense account. So I'm going to go into, let's say, do we have a contractor account? I'll create it real quick. So let me create contract labor. So I'm going to create a cost of goods sold account called contract labor. Make that cost of goods sold. Okay. And let's say, for example, they're charging me $3,000, and I'm going to go ahead and select my customer job. So I'll pick Northeast Wholesalers. And then let's say for a different customer altogether, they're charging me $2,000, and I'll pick this guy here, let's say West Coast Distributor. And let's say one of these is not billable. So I'm going to unmark that because I don't want to see it in an invoice as a specific charge item. So that's the one bill I got from my contractor, and I'm hitting GL accounts. I'm hitting accounts from my chart of accounts, an expense account, a cost of goods sold account. I'm not using items, or I'm not using timesheet. So this is a different scenario. Okay, so I'll put a note here saying 25% completed, or whatever I want to do. So I'm going to click on save. Okay, so there's my check, and it was marked billable. So now I'm going to go ahead and create an invoice for Northeast Food Wholesaler, and now I have a different tab here that says expenses. I'm going to click on that, and notice that there's my expense. So there's VU Contracting, there's the memo coming in, and then up here it says markup. So how much do I want to mark it up? If I use this option of markup, and I'll put here, for example, 50%, it will take a different line item and add it as my income, and then the expense itself is going to zero out with the invoice. So I spent it, I got reimbursed for it, and then only the difference becomes the income. So I'm going to show you how it looks with both ways, because it's actually worth looking at. So I'm going to go ahead and click on OK, and notice the display on the invoice. We get an item for the $3,000, and then we get an item for the markup. So the total is 4,500. Now the way I did this, I'm going to go ahead and click on preview. It actually shows cost and markup to the customer. Now in some cases, that's part of the contract, and that's okay. And in some cases, it's not. So I'm going to hit close. I'll click on clear. Remember, I have to go back into my original transaction in which I marked billable. So let me go into here. Who was it? It was VU Contracting, right? So I'm going to go into my check, and I have to mark this, make sure this is marked billable, make sure I didn't lose that in the process. Click save, and I'm going to minimize that, and then come back into my customer again, pick my expenses. This time around, I'm going to do the exact same thing with a 25% markup, but I'm going to click on print selected items as one item, and then I'm going to hit OK. And then what happens is it's the same process in terms of the way it looks on the timesheet internally, but it's very different how it looks to the customer, because now it will lump sum all together. I think I put $25 instead of 25%. That was my screw up from that perspective, but there it is. Or was it 50%? I think it was 50%. The same example as before. There we go. So I'm going to click on preview, and then it just looks like 4,500. So if you want to separate two different lines and get reimbursed for it per se, and again, you could choose whether or not your customer sees the markup, then you go with this approach. Now, let me pull a profit and loss real quick, just so we can get clarity around what exactly that happens in our accounting. So let me click on today. So there's the accounting for the 18th, and that's right. So there's my subcontracted labor income. I'm going to double click on that, and that's the markup. So that's the $1,500 of markup that came into this account called subcontracted labor income. And then when I click on contract labor, there's my $2,000 from the other customer, but then you also see with debits and credits the in and out from my vendor. So basically, choosing the approach in which I pick the markup, the cost itself will zero itself out, because it will come in as a reimbursed expense, and the only thing that you see in your profit and loss is the 1,500. Remember that 2,000 was for a different job altogether. Let me cut it off by job. Actually, much easier to read this way. So you get the 1,500, and then you got no cost of goods sold labor. Let me delete this one, because this was a different example. There we go. That's fine. I'll leave that there. So that's it. So the difference that I want to show you is, what if I weren't going to do that, if I weren't going to have a markup line. So let me mark this billable again. Go into my invoice. So customer center, go into my invoice that I just did with today's date. And then I'm going to go ahead and delete this line. Okay. And then I'm going to bring in my time and costs, but I'm not going to do any markup. Okay. So I'm not doing any markup. I'm going to hit OK. But instead of bringing in the markup, I'm going to change the rate manually. So I'm going to put here 4,500. So this is going to be very different than before, because I don't have a separate markup line. I'm just changing the rate I'm charging itself. So I'm going to click save. Okay, and then I want to go back and show you that same profit and loss, and you're going to see it's going to look a lot different. And the way you want to see it, that would be really up to you. Let me do here customer job. So the way it looks here, it looks much different. So because I picked the same expense account to get reimbursed, and I in fact didn't set up a separate income account as billable, it actually reverses it as a negative expense because it was just hitting that single contract labor account. So you have to be very careful if you don't use the markup feature with expense accounts. So that's that part itself. I'm showing you what doesn't look very nice, not because I want you to do it this way. I'm just kind of warning you about the potential errors when using billable expenses and changing the price instead of having a separate markup line. And as I mentioned earlier, you can either show the markup or not show the markup. That would certainly be up to you. Okay, so that's the concept of billable expenses with expenses and not items. By the way, generally, I never recommend doing it that way. So generally, I would never use billable expenses. Um, I would always use an item, not an expense account. Use an item because the item transfers over the invoice and is easier to read and easier to show. Okay. All right. So let's work with items instead. So let me go into my vendors. I'm going to go to enter bill. I'll pick my same contractor, VU contracting, and then I'm going to pick an item instead of an expense. Let's say I'm going to do this framing item, and let's say they worked 8 hours for, let's say, $40, and I'm going to pick my customer. Let me pick Walmart now as my customer, and then I'll do the same item here, framing, and let's say that was 10 hours for Walmart, but this one is not going to be billable. And then I'll pick the same item and I'll pick a different customer. Let me pick this one called Northeast, and I'll make that billable. And let me make that 2 hours. So hopefully you can kind of remember all these moving parts as we do this. So I'm going to hit save and close, and I'm going to create a new invoice now. Create invoice, and then I'll pick Walmart. Okay, I get my billable time and expenses tab. Now I'm working with items. See, now I'm dealing with items. So I'll select the item here, and then I hit OK, and that transfers over at the item cost. Now, where this $55 came from, this $55 came from my item list, and they were at $55. I'm going to show you something that's going to be really awesome. You're going to love this, actually. I'm going to delete the rate from this item and leave it blank, so no rate. And then I'm going to hit OK. Okay? And then I'm going to close that. I'll hit clear here. And I want to make sure that we remember exactly what we did with that bill. So was that a bill? No, yeah, it was a bill. So let me go into vendors, bill. That way we don't lose track of this. And then we have VU contracting. So if you remember correctly, I created this bill and I made this cost of $50. Actually, this is not the Walmart one. Let me change. Was that the same one? Let me just. No, that wasn't it. It could have been the other one. Let's see. Fine. Yep, it was this one. Sorry. So this is the one that we charge Walmart for it. So I'm going to put a cost. I'm going to put a real memorable number. Like I'm going to put 78.56. Right? That way we have a very specific number here. So notice what I did different, and I'm just going to update here the bill. What I did different is I went back into the item itself and I changed the price and I put no price, just deleted the price. Not even a zero, just delete the whole thing. And on the cost itself, on the bill, on the check, whatever, I'm actually putting my actual cost, what I ended up paying to my vendor. So I'm going to hit save and close. And the dynamic here is that when I go create an invoice from the billable time, it would actually transfer in my original cost. So at this point, I can obviously much better gauge, because I know exactly how much I paid for it. I can much better gauge what I'm going to charge. So if you're going to pick an item and you're going to use your billable rates that I talked about earlier, then perfect. You can set a rate and then pick your billable rates, and this will do it for you automatically. But if you actually want the actual out-of-pocket cost from that item to transfer in, you have to make sure that item does not have a cost in the item card, in the item attributes. That way, since QuickBooks doesn't have a place to get them from, it will get them straight from the cost and transfer that over. And that's real powerful stuff. Now, another thing that people ask for a lot is, hey, I have a customer in which I want to consume some inventory parts that I'm buying, but I don't want them to see it on the invoice. And I'm not charging for them because I'm just consuming them. I'm just including them as part of, let's say, my cost. So that's a different dynamic altogether. So I'll show you how that works. So I'm going to go ahead and create a PO, and I'll pick a vendor here at random. I'll pick that guy, and let's say I'm gonna buy some inventory parts. I'm gonna do some lumber trim, and I'm gonna bring 10 of these. Okay, and at $95, and I'm gonna pick a customer. I'm gonna pick this customer here called wholesale business, and then I'm gonna pick another inventory part altogether. I'll do some cabinet pools, and I'll bring 4 of these, and I'll do it for the same wholesale business. Right, that's just a PO. Right, so once the purchase order is created, and then my bill is created, so I'm gonna go ahead and bring in that bill. So enter the bill. And by the way, you don't have to do a PO. I did that just because it's customary to create a PO for inventory parts. Is maybe a force of habit. So I'm going to bring that in and make sure I mark it billable. Same process. I'm bringing in the inventory. I'm marking it billable because that inventory is for a very specific customer. I'm going to hit save and close. But then I want to charge it. Like I want to make sure the cost of that inventory goes to my job, but I don't necessarily want to charge my client for it. Like I don't want to invoice my client for it, but I still need to create an invoice for it, or I have to do invoice or sales receipt, doesn't really matter. So let's try with the sales receipt. So I'm gonna click on sales receipt. I'm gonna click on add time and cost. Let me pick my wholesale business. Pick my items. There's my inventory parts. Let me just pick the ones that I did today, which was the trim and the cabinet tools. And then I'm going to hit OK. And those come in. So all I want to do is consume them and make them part of the cost of the job, but not charge my customer for it. So I'm going to put 0 and 0. That way I use the items, I mark them billable to let me know that I'm going to consume them for a job. The sales receipt will consume them, and it will take them out of inventory and send it to cost of goods sold, and it won't go into an invoice, and it will go into my job costing. So I'm going to click save and close, and let me pull a profit and loss for today, and let me do this by job. Okay, so there's my wholesale business, and I just want you to notice that there's my job costing, and there's no invoice for it, right? Because I didn't sell it. I just job costed it. Now, let me go ahead and delete the sales receipt for a second because I want to show you a similar example, but a little bit different. And let me go back into that bill. And the bill was for something auto. What was it? Diane's Auto, yep. And I'm going to mark this billable again. Okay, as I mentioned before, since we already created the invoice for it, it marks itself unbillable or billed. So let me go back and create that invoice. Okay, this time around, I want to consume my inventory, but I want to charge the client a lump sum that is not for the inventory itself. So, but I do want to charge the inventory as part of the sale. Let's call it that. So I'm going to select these two, and then click here where it says print selected items as a single item. I'll click OK, and then basically this weird thing comes up, reimbursable group and all these things. So what I'll do at this point is I'll make both of these 0. Okay, because let's say, for example, that I'm not necessarily selling the items. And then I'm going to insert a line here. I'm going to go to edit, insert line, and then I'll create whatever service item that we charge for. Let's do installation, and let's say we're charging them a flat fee for $1,000. So what this does essentially is takes my inventory parts that were marked billable, sends them over to my invoice, consumes the inventory, job cost, the cost of goods sold, does not charge or sell the items, and it allows me to insert a flat dollar amount in there. So when I click on save again, and I'll do a preview. The customer only sees the $1,000 in there. However, the real cost of those items were consumed to my cost of goods sold. But now the beautiful thing is when I run my profit and loss by job, and I'll do this by customer, and then I'll do today again, we're actually going to see the contrast. We're going to see the $1,000 of income, and then we're going to see the cost of the parts, and then my running profit. So a lot of things, a lot of moving parts. I mean, I'm probably presenting 3 hours worth of content into cramming them into 1 hour, but trying to bring in as many things as possible into one hour session. So let me do a polling question real quick before we do the last section, which is the miles. And I'm just wondering if I think the most of you are QuickBooks Pro advisors or are accountants working with QuickBooks clients, doing QuickBooks consulting. Wondering how many of you are actual resellers. I'm a big fan of QuickBooks Enterprise, and I'm recommending them to my customers all the time. And there's real handsome benefits to being a reseller. So if you already are a reseller, just answer it there. And if you put no, but you're interested, I will send you some information. Well, I'll remember to, because I've asked this already in like 9 webinars and I haven't had the chance to send you the info. But if you do put that you're interested, or you can email me directly, Hector@GarciaCPA.com. I can talk to you about that, because QuickBooks Enterprise is definitely a high ticket item, and Intuit pays really well to folks that are getting customers in it. And it's a huge benefit. You see exactly how awesome this works. Now, on QuickBooks Online, and I hate to be a person criticizing QuickBooks Online, but QuickBooks Online doesn't have this level of dynamic, with all the billable time and cost, although it is getting better and better by the day. The problem is the reports. The QuickBooks desktop reports are much better on the billable time side. Okay, so that gives me a quick break to drink water because I need it. Speaking at 1,000 miles per minute here, 1,000 words per minute. Let me click on close poll, and let me do the last topic, which is the miles. Now, this is, in my opinion, one of the most underutilized features in QuickBooks, for the most part because not that many businesses are charging miles. However, I want to show you, at face value, what the miles feature works for, and I'm also going to show you at not face value what you could do with it. So I'm going to show you both things. So I'm going to go into company, then I'm going to click on enter vehicle mileage, and I'm going to create a vehicle. So let's say, for example, I used my Volkswagen Atlas 2018, and I'll put here Hector's car. Okay, and then I'll hit OK. And let's say on today, I can go straight for miles. I spent 134 miles driving to deliver a product. So I'm going to select the customer, and I'll pick here this customer here called C6. And then under item, I'm going to put miles. So this is at face value what it is. We can do special delivery, whatever it happens to be. Okay. And that's it. So I did that. I don't have to do my odometer reading, start and ending. I can go straight to just the mileage. And just think of miles as a quantity for now, because I'm going to kind of tell you what that means after. And then the item is just basically a service item. And by the way, really important, you can only use service or other charges. You can't use inventory items or non-inventory items. And that doesn't make any sense, right? Because the context of this is miles. So we have a service item called miles, and then we'll hit save and close. And then I'm going to go into my item list, and then I'm going to look for my miles item. There it is. Oops. There's my miles item. And then I'm going to give it a rate. So let's say I'm charging, 55 cents a mile. And I'll make this non-taxable, and I'll hit OK. So now, when I create an invoice, so I'll create an invoice for this customer called C6. Okay, I get the same pop-up. I'm going to select mileage, click on the little checkbox. Same thing in terms of details. I can transfer the details in here just like a timesheet. So in this particular case, it works exactly like a timesheet, identical to a timesheet. I'm going to hit OK and then hit OK. And that comes in. There you go. There's my quantity, 134. There's my rate. There's my invoice amount. So I'm going to hit save and close. Keep forgetting to do that. Save and close. And that's it. That's simple. There's a report here. Reports, job time and mileage. I can now do mileage by vehicle or mileage by job, whatever I want. And then here is all my miles by job. So I can actually track the miles that I'm driving for each job and how many we billed for. So in this case, I billed 7370. Now, not all miles have to be billed, right? In some cases, you can strictly just use this to track your miles. So you don't have to mark in billable. So if you want to track a certain level of miles, so let's say I'm going to track miles that I'm not going to bill for, but I do want to know how much because maybe that means something to me in the future. So I'm going to pick my miles here and I'll pick a customer job, whatever, and I hit save and close. So I can bring that in and there it is, 789 miles. But in this particular case, let's see on this one, let me unmark it billable. That was my mistake. Hit save and close. And then it only shows me, like it keeps track, but it only shows me the amount that is billable. Now here under customize reports, so top left, I went a little fast there. I can click on build, unbilled, and not billable, hit OK. And then I get a whole slew of dynamics here with my miles. I get my miles, I get how much are billable, how much are not billable, how much I'm pending to bill. So that becomes a real neat tool. But mileage could be something else that's not mileage, right? So let me tell you what I mean by that. There is a feature in QuickBooks Online called delayed charges, and QuickBooks Online doesn't have that. And a delayed charge would be, I want to accumulate how much work I've been doing for a particular customer, but I don't want to go in an invoice and every single day add the extra hours I'm doing or whatever, or I don't want to go into an estimate and keep adding it over and over. So what you can do is you can actually use the mileage feature, assuming you're not doing actual miles. So I can use the mileage feature, and then I can create a vehicle called Hector's Time. Okay, used to track on let's call it billable time, and I'm doing this in lieu of a timesheet, and this may not make sense because hey, why would it, if you got a timesheet, why would you do this? So maybe time is not the best example, but just to tell you, just think of any service, think of let's just call it emergency support. That may be actually more contextual. So let's say, for example, that a customer calls 3 times a month to or sometimes 5, sometimes 6. So every single time I want to charge him for, let's say, for making that call, I'll accumulate it here. So I'm going to put here call for ER support for the pipes, whatever happens to be. So I'm just giving you some random context. And I'm going to go to select Abercrombie Christie, save a new, and let's say the same thing. Again, this is not a vehicle. This is something else entirely. So I'm going to pick a different date, and I'm also going to pick a 9 here. A 1, and then pick the same thing. Forgot which one I was using. Labor. And I'm going to put ER support for roof, whatever happens to be. So what you can do, which is kind of cool with this, is you can use your mileage to track instances of something that's not necessarily miles. Like the context of this is miles, but as long as I think of miles as quantity, and then I go back at the end of the month, and then let's say I'm going to invoice my customer the normal stuff that I normally invoice them. So I'm going to go to Abercrombie Christie, and let's say, for example, normally I invoice them, I don't know, $100 a month, plus my 2 instances of emergency calls, I can bring them in here, okay? Plus whatever my monthly service is. Let's say I charge $100 a month, whatever. So as long as I have a rate set on those items, a fixed rate, I can use mileage to track instances of quantities of anything. Again, time may not be the most relevant thing because obviously a timesheet would be the best use for that, but just giving you like a little way to think outside the box in terms of how mileage can work. Okay, let me see my questions here. So somebody says, I really like the inventory consumables. That's really good. Let's see. Let's see. Can you show the gross sales if you want to see full disclosure? So Carrie was asking about the billable expenses. So as long as you select the markup and don't select to hide it, then you can fully disclose that. So that was going back to something we covered before. Okay, I think that's it. Let me see if I missed anything here in this process. I did not. Okay, I did not. So let me run the last polling question so I can wrap this up. And now I would like to know, especially for the folks that at the beginning said they were feeling pretty comfortable with it and didn't learn something new. I'd like to know if I changed or if I taught you something new in the process. So just answer the last polling question for me, please, and then we'll talk about the next couple of dates we have for Enterprise.expert webinars. Okay. All right. So please answer the polling question. It's very helpful for me to know, especially if I'm achieving the concept of teaching you something new, because if I'm not, then I know I'm not in the right direction here. All right, perfect. So I got about 75% of the votes. I'll take that, no problem. I'll hit close poll, hit share results. So there was 5 of you that already know this content. So I'm sorry. I wish I taught you something new, but that's it. I think for the most part, that's it. That's what QuickBooks can do. I don't think that QuickBooks can do anything else. So it may have been a futile chance to try to show you something new if you already knew all the content already. Anyway, next episode will be November 18th. So I'm not sure if that lands on a. Let me double check if that's supposed to land on a Wednesday. Maybe I'm using the wrong date here. Actually, no, November 22nd. So I apologize. November 18th is not the day. That's a Saturday. Sorry about that. I was all messed up with Thanksgiving and stuff. So November 18th will be the next episode. It will be some sort of advanced QuickBooks Enterprise topic like we have now, but don't know exactly what the topic is. And then the last one for the year will be December 20th. So November will be technically the fourth Wednesday, and December will go back to the third Wednesday. So if you're watching this in YouTube, not the live webinar, go to Enterprise.expert to register. And tomorrow, I'd like to invite you to tomorrow's episode of QB Power Hour, a different webinar series that it's going to be all about journal entries and net zero checks, and it will be an ACE credit webinar for advanced pro advisors. And I tell you, it's going to be as interesting or more than this one because I've done some heavy research on the journal entry side. So we're going to do something really interesting in depth about organizing journal entries in every way, shape, or form. Then on November 1st, we'll do a webinar on international taxation. I have a speaker lined up that's an expert on taxation for international folks or U.S. people working abroad and how that, or earning money abroad and how the taxation works. And then on November 22nd, same day as Enterprise.expert at 4 p.m., I have a guest speaker talking about Instagram, mostly Instagram and how it compares to Snapchat for small business marketing. So we have a wide array of education with all sorts of topics, not just QuickBooks and accounting. Anyway, thank you for joining us. Join the Facebook group. This is the best place to expand the conversation and continue the conversation. And if you have any specific questions about QuickBooks Enterprise, there's my email. And that's it, Hector at GarciaCPA.com. Thank you very much, and you have a wonderful day.